I think that stories can change the world. They always have. Our science fiction stories actually helped build this current space age where we are building rockets based on our own imagery of the science fiction stories that were predicting the future.
This is Life's Tough, Explorers Are Tougher, and I'm your host, Richard Wiese. Scratch the surface of an explorer and you'll find an adventure and a great story. This show is about their tales. This podcast is a proud supporter of the Explorers Club and the EC50 Initiative, 50 people changing the world that the world needs to know about. For more information, go to explorers.org. I have a theory about explorers. Explorers are the original storytellers. They love to tell stories at any time, any place. If you go to the Explorers Club, especially in the bar, you will hear a story. But the art of storytelling goes way back. I also have a theory that ever since people came out of caves or out of the savannah, there was always one person who came back standing over a fire and said, "You'll never guess what happened to me. You'll never guess what I saw." Well, today the campfire may have been replaced by film reels or digital hard drives, but the impulse is the same: to share wonder, to reveal the unknown, to connect us through story. Brendan Hall is one of those voices. He's a filmmaker, a photographer, an Explorers Club 50 honoree. Brendan's work takes us from national parks to outer space, and the outer space in and itself is a great story, always with an eye for meaning and beauty. I'm thrilled to welcome to Life's Tough, Brendan Hall. Brendan, hi, how are you?
Oh, I'm good. Thank you for having me.
You know, when I talk about my idea of a storyteller, there's a scene out of the movie The Right Stuff, which was about the space program. And there were some old school Aboriginal people in Australia who were standing over a fire and you could sort of see the flames going up. When I mention storyteller to you, what's the first thing that comes to mind for you?
Oh, man. I think of all these different mediums. Like, a great story is an idea that somebody has to share, or a piece of life someone wants to communicate through a medium in which they express themselves. And so I originally, if you had asked me maybe 10 years ago, would have just said like filmmaker, because that's so much where my head was at. But now, we're telling stories through dance, through writing, through talks that people give. And so I'm much more in this headspace right now that we're all storytellers. And so I think of this like mosaic of mediums,
When you were a kid, were you always the person who sort of around the dinner table told the story, or?
Yeah, I was 12 years old. I had always wanted a camcorder, and it was like right at a time where you could buy a little Sony camcorder at Best Buy. You could get a $40 trial for an editing software. And so for some reason, I was always just like so tapped into this idea of wanting to capture everything around me. I was a skateboarder. That was a big entry point for me too. And I was pretty bad at skateboarding. And as soon as I got this camcorder, I started filming my friends skating. I'd do documentaries and little narrative pieces. I'd film birds and plants in my backyard. And I was hooked. I really don't remember a time past getting that camcorder where I wanted to do anything but make films. So yeah, I was not the dinner table storyteller, but I was definitely filming everything around me.
Before I get to your current film right now, which is called Out There, a national park story, I mentioned that some of your journey goes as far as outer space. And when I met you, you were part of this dearMoon mission. For those people who are unaware with dearMoon, what is dearMoon?
Yeah, so dearMoon was a civilian lunar space flight that was set to happen with SpaceX. There's a Japanese billionaire named Yusaku Maezawa that around 2018 had purchased the first ever 8 seats on Starship, SpaceX's kind of flagship rocket that's going to take people to the moon and to Mars and beyond. And he wanted to fill these seats with artists and creatives. He had actually this very cool vision that we've seen traditional astronauts go up. We've seen scientists. We've never seen an entire crew of civilians or civilian artists go up and around the moon. And so he did this open call online. I did a whole year-long selection process in 2021. I just threw my name in the hat because I saw it in a news article. And it led to a year's worth of interviews, Zoom interviews, psychological interview, medical interview. I was flown to UCLA hospital to get my, medical checkups done by SpaceX. And by the end of the year, I was selected to be part of a lunar civilian mission. And I was on the Today Show talking about it and doing press. And long story short, we could talk about it as much as you want, but I spent about 2 years after that in kind of the footsteps of a to-be civilian, spaceflight participant, astronaut, whatever word you think is fair to use. And we hadn't begun training, but we were going to rocket test launches. I was filming around the world with my crew members. I got to go up to so many astronauts and say, what would be your advice for me to go on this journey, and have like a reason to talk to them. And sadly, kind of the end of last year, Yusaku Maezawa pulled the plug and kind of made the decision to cancel the mission. And so it was this like amazing rise and fall of a life experience. And, my whole thing behind it was I was like, this experience is like a bullet train towards having a platform as a filmmaker, towards learning from people, towards meeting astronauts and being in the space industry. There is a space industry for people that don't know. And no matter where I get off, whether it's at the end of a moon journey or before, I'm just like grateful to have done it. And so, yeah.
But Brendan, you know how crazy, like that's an Explorers Club story. It really is. I hear crazy stories all the time. And, filming skateboarders to being asked to go to the moon, there's a huge gulf between those two. I mean, was it one of those pinch yourself, or when they actually said you were selected, where were you? Did they call you? How'd that all happen?
It was unbelievable. I mean, I was at the end of a year of doing interviews every couple of months. I'd hit these stages and then get another email that I had made it further. By the time I was doing a medical interview, I said, so 1 million people applied for this from almost every country in the world. I never in a million years thought that I would be selected, just because when you're going for a 1 in a million chance, you have to be real confident in yourself to think that you're really going to be able to get there. And what I was proud of in the process was I had this moment where I really had to think about exploration, think about the accessibility of my filmmaking. And I have a reel of, I've been in over 50 countries and 45 national parks. I've interviewed probably 1,000 people. And so I'm really proud to have got to all of these corners of the earth and met so many folks. But my kind of brand of exploration and storytelling was always about accessibility and saying, when you see me in the national parks, I'm probably like overpacking my car or dropping a camping stove or doing something that feels a lot more like nerdy and passionate than climbing the highest peak or doing anything that's a, big physical feat or first. And so during the moon process, there was a part of me at first that wanted to say, I'm this epic explorer. I've done all this work. I've traveled the world. I'm like the coolest guy ever. But I kind of wanted to give a real picture of myself, because I felt that if I was selected for this and I was living in a bit of a lie or kind of an energy that I don't have, then I'd be stuck in it going to the moon for years. And so I just like it was a great practice in being myself, of saying, I want to just like be humble and be kind and excited about this. I want to uplift others. And I want to talk about how exploration in this journey should feel like something we can all do, not just that we're this incredible group of 8 people selected. And so they had a final Zoom call with me, Thanksgiving around then of 2021, and said, we just want to ask you a few more questions before your selection. And then when I logged on, it was just me and MZ, the billionaire. And he essentially said, do you want to know the results of dearMoon? And it was kind of like my American Idol moment. There was this long,
did you have it in your heart must have been in your throat at that point.
Total out of body experience. Even thinking back, it feels more like I was watching myself do this than like living in it. Total pause. It was my American Idol moment where I knew that one way or another, I was going to get news that was going to change my life. And he said, I'd love for you to be part of this journey. Would you like to join me? And, I threw my hands back and I immediately said, yes, I'd be the honor of my lifetime. Yeah, it was a crazy moment.
Our mission is to empower the next generation of explorers. If you like this podcast, please recommend it to a friend and have them join the expedition. I've actually met probably 8 people who've actually walked on the moon. And, that's one of the benefits of the Explorers Club, and some of the people you meet You mentioned the idea of civilian storytelling. I'll give you an example. I remember walking one day with Buzz Aldrin, if I can drop a name there. And I said to him, when you look up at the moon, what do you think? And he goes, to be honest, nothing much. He goes, I know I should say something that's very deep and philosophical. He goes, but I really don't. And I remember also meeting Neil Armstrong, and not to say that he was kind of like on the spectrum type of person, but these guys were so focused in what they were doing, they really weren't hired to have emotional responses to anything they did. They were just set, like to just execute a mission. Did you, by the way, meet any moonwalkers in the process?
Yeah, it was an amazing kind of full circle moment. It was just over the holidays, these past holidays. I was with Charlie Duke, who walked
great guy.
Apollo era, awesome guy, Explorers Club member. And he had never been on Antarctica. He'd never been there or stepped on the seventh continent. And so I was there with my partner, Gabby, filming him as he stepped out of a little Zodiac boat onto the continent of Antarctica. And we actually took an old school Super 8 camera and kind of filmed him with his big boots walking up the landscape for the first time. And so that was really cool. And I just flew in 0G for the first time with Dr. Cyan Proctor, another EC50 honoree. And so, not to be cheesy, but it really felt like a shoot for the moon and land among the stars kind of moment of still being in a space industry, surrounded by astronauts, surrounded by explorers. And so, yeah, the journey was a totally unexpected one, but led me kind of right where it feels like I should be.
So we're talking about the moon, but ultimately, probably you're best known right now for your beautiful film on the national parks. And for people who have not seen it, I can say it's different approach to the national park than I've seen. That generally people do stories about the beauty of the national park. And I felt that you had used the national park as a backdrop for some wonderful stories about people within the national park and maybe how they were transformed. How did this whole project start? I know it took several years and it probably had some twists and turns throughout it.
What happened from age 12 to almost going to the moon? Like the short answer to that is I went to NYU film school and I thought I'd make narrative films, Hollywood films. And I was obsessed with it. I was like, I want to be Spielberg or Scorsese. And then in the middle of college, I was doing a summer in Los Angeles, doing some internships. And I thought that was like the beginning of the rest of my life. And then I started hiking and I started going to national parks on weekends. And then I drove home that summer and with my childhood friend, Anthony, did 6 national parks in 7 days, which is way too fast. I don't recommend that pace necessarily. But, I had this very tangible moment on the edge of the Grand Canyon, seeing the Milky Way through the sky for the first time. There's lightning cracking around it. The Perseid meteor shower was shooting stars through the sky. And it was the first moment that I attribute to feeling like magic in nature. It was something that I could never possibly explain to someone how it felt, but I knew that nature could give us these amazing transformative experiences. And so it was having that little sliver of a national park to myself for just one night where I walked away saying, I actually want to make documentary films and make films with stories of people like me connecting to a place and being transformed by it. And so that was like a kernel in the middle of college where I came out of that realizing, I grew up watching Planet Earth and reading Nat Geo magazine. Around then, I had first learned of the Explorers Club too, and saying that there's actually this part of me that wants to travel the world and meet people and tell their stories. And so coming out of college, I was working at the National Geographic Channel for a little while, helping them assist with development and production. And even though it was a really cool job, I was working in an office 9 to 5, and I wasn't being the kind of explorer that I was dreaming of, which was actually being on the ground, meeting people. Very long story short is I left that job. They were very loving and supportive about it and embarked on what would be kind of the biggest, scariest, most important dream project for me as an artist, which was making a film about national parks. And so me, my friend Anthony, who's now an educator, who was on my original road trip, we hit the road for about 4 months in the centennial year of the Park Service. And what we discovered was that it wasn't just about filming landscapes, but we were meeting all of these incredible people. And so our project became this big on wonder ode to the human stories in the national parks. It took 7 years. I'm the director, cinematographer, and editor. We did more filming over some years and editing. And so the final film, it's called Out There, a national park story, is a big kind of ode to our connection to these places and the incredible people you meet while you're traveling. So we're really excited. We're touring all across the country this year. We've done 20 film festivals, and we're aiming for around early next year to do our big kind of public online release. So
it was interesting watching that film, because I've always felt that when people go someplace, it's not necessarily the summit that's the most memorable. It's the people you meet along the way. And the people that I thought so beautifully portrayed, there was empathy, there was a lot of vulnerability within that. And so do you remember the first person that you along that journey that you said, wow, it's about the people within the park? I mean, that came through very strong to me.
Yeah, I mean, the first person we meet in the film, which is also who we met on the trip, his name's Gary Stelpflug, and he helped build the trails in Acadia National Park for nearly 50 years. He's a Park Service employee. He wears his heart on his sleeve, and he went from having maybe 2 employees with him to 20 or 30 over the course of that time. And man, he is just such a bright soul and so heartfelt about the work he does. And he's like choking up thinking about trails, and illuminated for me and Anthony that we had been hiking trails for years and had never once thought about who actually built this. And so that really opened the portal for us, realizing that there's not just great stories in parks, but great untold stories and great accessible stories. You know, so often we see a film about an incredible climber, someone who did the AT in a record time, but not all of us see a piece of ourselves in that person. They say, oh, this is this remarkable athletic person, but it doesn't make me feel more comfortable to like get in my minivan and see a national park for the first time. And so what we wanted to try to do in the film was show people that we think are incredible, people that we think are heroes, but that through years of service or dedication or reflection, vulnerably, each of us feels like we see a piece of ourselves in that person, and it makes us want to get into nature too. And so in terms of like creating that space, you know, part of it is just intentionality, being honest about what we're doing. We told people, we said, this is like an awe and wonder film. It's very nonpartisan. It represents voices from all different sides of ideology. And it's about how we come to love these spaces, even despite, you know, we have a character, Jack Gladstone from the Blackfeet Nation in Montana, that talks about his people being displaced from that land and pushed off so that they could create that national park. And so even when that form of love has conflict and both light and darkness in it, how do we come together to want to protect these spaces in the way that they're meant to? And both of my parents are clinical psychologists. So I joke that film interviews and therapy are really 2 of the only times that you have a one-on-one conversation with someone. They're being given space to open up and reflect, and you're not expected to be sharing about your story. And so I'd say it's that. And I was really honest. I shared my Grand Canyon story and my park story with everyone I met. And then was like, man, I'm just like, me and Anthony are young guys who just love this stuff and want to share it and want to get more young people outdoors. And never push people too hard to open up about anything they didn't want to.
You were talking about the experience of people there, but yet my favorite character in your whole thing was your youngest character, Butterfly Girl. It was this wonderful African-American girl who, in the most genuine, enthusiastic way, told you about all the butterflies she had seen. And it was just, it reminded me of when you see little kids on a sandbar and they're bent over looking at a snail and they're just so into it. They're into that moment. And it was just such genuine discovery for the first time.
That was amazing, you know, and it's funny that this little girl that has maybe a minute of screen time in the film, everyone walks away, you know, being one of their top moments, if not their top moment. And we felt the same way. So like in between, we have 4 kind of main subjects that have longer stories. And in between, there's little bits and bops of people we meet at viewpoints and along the way. And so we just saw this family silhouetted at sunset, and they looked glorious and beautiful with this big landscape behind them, and then started talking to them. And it turns out that their little daughter is magic. She's talking about how much she loves butterflies, how obsessed she is with them. and then goes into this really deep little moment about how her uncle recently passed away. And when she sees a butterfly, she feels like she's seeing her uncle. And like everyone is just laughing and sheds a single tear. It's
Yeah,
like,
Brendan. Yeah, thanks a lot for getting me all misty-eyed. I forgot about that moment of it, but she was terrific. Do you think it's possible to tell stories through goodness and people still buy into it?
I love that question, and that was kind of the big test of this film. We had people that said it should be a bunch of short docs. You have these individual characters. You can't just make a film piecing together a bunch of disparate stories. And people that said you need it to be based on conflict and tension and intensity, and I said, even if it's a totally imperfect film, to get people to sit and see one journey through the parks, see all these stories and walk away saying all of that exists out there for me and out there in the parks. That was what was most important. And we did test screenings and everyone said, oh my God, yeah, this should definitely be one film. And so I do believe that we can tell good stories, heartfelt stories, and positive ones, But I also think that coming together over shared love of places makes us want to preserve them. There's heavy moments in our film of someone dealing with loss, Jack Gladstone dealing with the history of his people. But ultimately, I think it kind of feels good to smile and feel a sense of wonder, especially now when I was just in Oregon last week with a 450 person sold out theater. And the next night, a 300 person sold out theater. And the next night, 250 people. And we shared these sunrises and sunsets with 1,500 people in person in a week. And those are the moments that I look back. And as a filmmaker, I'm so glad that I first sweated 7 years into this film, into every single moment. But second, created a communal experience. Because when you're sitting around other people engaging with the story, I think is a really special moment.
Do you feel from the creative process, and I'll give you examples, Arthur Miller's plays were written out of suffering or difficult things, Death of a Salesman. You guys were sleeping in cars in campgrounds and, suddenly you do another film and you're like, wow, it's nice staying in this hotel. And, you can keep ratcheting up where you become, a little more removed from the vulnerability of what you filmed.
Yeah, it's definitely possible. And at least so far in my filmmaking, I'm 31 now, so I'm almost a decade in since graduating college. A lot of my best work is through a lived experience and through taking the feeling of a lived experience of talking to someone, being in a place for the first time and that energy and communicating it through the editing, the music, the way that the film feels. And so my hope is that as long as I stay true to that feeling of taking an experience that's affecting me and chasing things I'm really excited about, it'll stay pure to the subject material. You're someone, Richard, you've done so many episodes of television and multiple seasons, but I can tell that you just get giddy with curiosity, meeting a new person and walking in someone's shoes for the first time. And, I think staying in that just curiosity as a human being is definitely the way to make your work kind of reflect that.
I guess for me, first of all, you have to like people, right? You just inherently have to like people to do what you're doing, or even what I do. I guess the biggest sort of mind shift for me, and I wish this would have come to me earlier, is that when it's not about you, you come across so much stronger and so much more interesting than sort of that pounding of the chest and, saying, I am the master of all I see. And, my chief complaint when I watch other hosts or wildlife films, I sort of look at it and go, oh God, to me, it looks so fake and so contrived. And, that person who's the master of all they see and, can just intuitively do all those things doesn't exist. And once you get it out of the headspace about being about you and you tell someone else's story, you actually come off better.
I believe that too, and something I really wanted to do with Out There was shoot every frame of the film myself. And it wasn't because of a need to necessarily be that person or show off and say, oh, I filmed at all these parks. But it was to show people that without a big camera crew and with just two guys who are really passionate, we're totally nerdy campers in the film, we're stumbling and bumbling and learning how to road trip and how to camp. but that any of us, if given the amazing privileges and opportunities to do it, can see a scope of nature that feels like this and feels like a nature film. Our story is in that film to show, that youthful journey, but ultimately all of the wise words and the heroic quotes and the coolest moments happen through the eyes of other people.
So I know people must ask you this question all the time because you did go to so many national parks. Is there a favorite? That's a tough question, right?
Yeah, and it's the question I get asked the most, I think, because national parks are like sports teams almost. When we do screenings, people will wear their Zion shirt and their Grand Canyon hat. And I kind of joke that it's almost like we're a band, but the national parks are the band because people are coming and wearing all their merch and are almost like fans of the parks. The first thing that's really cool is that the national park system in the US, there's 63 national parks and over 400 units if you include historic sites and monuments. And that system encompasses every kind of ecosystem you can see on Earth. When people say, what park should I go to? It's almost like, what park do you need in your life? What ecosystem is resonating with you right now? For me, there's a couple parks I do like mentioning. One is Yosemite, which is a big fan favorite, but I've been there 5 or 6 times. I've spent time with really good friends there. A couple months ago, I actually proposed to my girlfriend there, which is a really special moment.
Congratulations.
Today. Thank you. And so that's a park that I drive through, and like around every corner of the road, I have memories that I'll share with my kids someday. And then Glacier is just a heavy hitter. Glacier is an amazing place. Huge mountains and lakes, the Blackfeet history, both the difficulty and the beauty of that history, as well as evidence of climate change. 130 glaciers down to 30 and dwindling. And it represents for me all of the important things a park should preserve and tell.
Is there one point in your life where you think to yourself, now that's the best advice I ever received?
The most important moment for me was realizing that I'm a filmmaker now, but that's not my whole identity, is I'm a multitude of things. I love hiking. I love reading. I love juggling. There's all these like different parts of Brendan that make up who I am. And I think sometimes we get so stuck in one version of an identity for ourselves, where one of the biggest takeaways for me as a filmmaker has been that I don't need to be a filmmaker for my whole career necessarily. And one of the most important things that I've learned is that there's no set path and no certain path that you have to take. As a filmmaker, as an artist, as an explorer, the path that I've taken has been completely unconventional. And as a freelancer, as someone who's been wandering and doing all of these jobs and projects, I think it's important to know that whether you go to film school or not, whether you do an office job or take a more freelance career, there's only the path that works for you. So knowing yourself and then expressing that through your lifestyle, I think is the way to get to exactly where you need to go.
Do you believe stories can change people's minds or even their behavior?
I think that stories can change the world. They always have. Something really cool is that our science fiction stories actually helped build this current space age, for example, where we are building rockets based on our own imagery of the science fiction stories that were predicting the future. I always thought that that was such a big claim, but the truth is our whole world is built off storytelling. Stories around the dinner table, stories that we tell in books and in films. And so storytelling couldn't be more important. And I'm really proud of being part of a club where storytelling is so much at the center. Even our most intense scientists get to come back and tell stories at the lectern about what they saw. And so that kind of art and magic of communicating ideas back to people and what exploration is. It's going out in the world, either far and wide or into your community and your culture and bringing back something to share that you found. So I still think that that's one of just the great drivers of who we are.
You mentioned a lectern at the Explorers Club, and I have seen you speak there, and I want to give you goosebumps before we go. That very lectern, I've seen Jane Goodall's hands there, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, Sir Edmund Hillary, and I can keep going on and on and on in that storytelling tradition. So Brendan, you truly have followed in the footsteps of really great storytellers. And For people, again, I want to remind them it's called Out There, a national park story. It is not just a journey through national parks, it's a journey through emotion, and it's a mirror in which the viewer can reflect on their own life. So, Brendan, thank you so much for being part of this today.
Thank you. It's my pleasure, and I'm honored to be part of the Explorers Club as well.
I hope you enjoyed our podcast. Now we have a little favor to ask. We'd really appreciate your support, so make sure to leave us a 5-star review and hit that subscribe button so you'll never miss another episode. See you out on the trail.